Welcome to our course, C++ for Absolute Beginners. We're moving now into the Language Fundamentals module, and I'd like to give you an idea of what we're going to cover. We're going to start off with some simple variable declarations, and then we're going to move into conditionals, so if, else, those kinds of forking conditionals, and then we'll move into arrays, which are fixed in C++, as opposed to, say, vectors, which we'll cover later on. Next is various kinds of looping, so for loops, while loops, which can be conditional as well. And then there are structures, similar to a class, but not quite as heavy, you could say, as classes. And of course, we're going to end with a good challenge to really see that you've absorbed everything we've covered in this module. And there will be a solution walkthrough as well. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Brett, and in this module we are going to begin getting into language fundamentals. So what I'm going to do is create a new project in NetBeans. So I'm going to just do File, New, and I am going to call this one Module 2, and Finish. All right, so over here we have our source files. So I'm going to open up that folder and then open up my main.cpp. And there's nothing in here right now. We're going to start adding our content. All right, so just to kind of explain a few things here going on in this file. So we have the standard library. That's what this include is doing there. We have this namespace, which is giving us access to different features inside of the standard library. So down here, if I do something like cout and hello world, which we did see earlier, and I'm going to do semicolon, and I'm going to include IO stream save. Now I'm pulling this C out from within here, so that's why I am including it. All right, and so the way this is working, it's saying take this hello world, these arrows, and then push it into the console out. That's what it basically means. So if I run it, then we'll see again the end result of this, which we get our hello world. All right, so we return 0 on this. This is actually implied. So a C++ comment is like this with 2 slashes, forward slashes. So I'm going to save my file. I am going to run again, and notice everything is fine. So I'm going to build just to make sure, and run, and we get the same output. So it's really implied, but it's explicit here that we have this return 0. So our function is main. That's the entry point of our application. It's an int type. That's why we can return this 0. Then we have a few arguments. We're not using arguments right now, but these are default. They need to be there. So you have an integer, then you have this char star star, which is basically pointing, and we'll get into those more as we progress throughout the course. All right, so we have our hello world, and I am actually going to do a few other different things here with our outputs. And let's go ahead and create a different kind of string here. So defining variables. These are just some of the items we're going to work on. I want 2 carriage returns, so I'm doing this \n for new line. I'm doing 2 of them, which should give me 2 new lines. And I'm going to do another line here and say something like the following are some important data types in C++, and I'm going to do my new lines, and I'll end it with a semicolon. So that's a line terminator, and we always need those when we're terminating a line of code. All right, so we're going to do another cout here, and I'm going to say character, and just point to this char save. Let's go ahead and run this now so we can see the output that we're getting, and there we are. So a little bit of formatting we have going on here, and you can see our other is right there. And actually, if I remove some of these, because it might group better on these topics there, so if I run that one, everything is grouped a little bit more closely. And we can do a few more of these. So integer signed. These are just a lot of the ones we are going to be covering. And we have these types, int, long, double. And then as well, we have Boolean, which just looks like bool. And then we have floating type, and that is going to be float. All right, so now let's get into the meat of things. And I'm going to put a comment here. Now we are going to define variables. And this is just going to be a simple one for an age. So I'm going to do an int age. My variable is called age, as you can see now, of type int. And I will give it an integer of 10. And save. So not really anything to do there. We're not going to see any kind of effect. If I run our application, all we're seeing is our string output at this point. Because we've done no manipulations and haven't tried to output any kind of result from this particular variable. So let's define a few more variables. So we'll create float age. That's going to be 10.1. And notice here that the variables are preceded by their types. That is important. You must do that in C++. Now we're going to create a character, and that is just going to be an A. Let's go ahead and output these. So we're now going to combine a string and our value together. So value of age int variable, and I'll do it like that. So when I want to add an actual variable into my string, I can just continue with these arrows, do age, and now I want a line, so I'm going to do another string and save. So if I run this, you can see here value of age int variable. So we've combined our value and a string in this case, but let's keep going with some of these others. So value, and I need to do my double quotes there, value of age float variable. And we can again do our arrows, age, and then we'll do a new line, save. Let's go ahead and grab the character. So we'll say value of character variable, and we'll do char a and add a new line, save and run. So there we are with our output. Now let's do something as well. And you can see here we're getting this little light bulb over here, assign return value to new variable. We don't need to worry about that right now, but I am going to put a breakpoint on this line 36. So I'm just clicking in the margins so we can see what's going to happen with that debugger. Now, if I run this, notice everything just ran and nothing happened. What we want with this breakpoint is to stop right here. So I'm going to run this one over here, which is our debug project. Let that go, and we're going to end up stopping. Now I'm going to just start walking through this code. So step over, step over, step. There's our breakpoint. Down here, we have a few tabs. So I've got our variables, and you can see there's nothing being assigned because we don't have any variables yet. They're all a little further down on line 31. So I'll keep stepping over and watch down in our variables what's going to happen with age. Now we can see these start getting values, and we'll let that go. And I'm just going to go ahead and let that run out and complete our program. I'm just going to remove this breakpoint and go to our output, and let's see, going to go ahead and try to get that to complete. All right, there we go. Now it's starting again, but I don't want to do that. So that is what happens when you set a breakpoint and get it to stop wherever you want it to. Now in this case, I think there is a setting that will stop it in main. If you're running in the main, it will just start walking through it as you start doing your debugging session. Now let's take this variable age, and I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint there and let that run. Now we stop on the first line, but I want to get down here to age. I'm going to bring up our variables tab again. So what I'm going to do is let it go ahead and continue. So I'll click this green button up here at the top. It's going to jump down to my breakpoint on line 32. age is still 0 at this point. And I'm going to go ahead and stop this now. And what we're going to do, we have our age right here on line 35. So I'm going to run this one more time, continue on down, and just start walking down there. And let's see here where our age is. Let's see right here. So age int is 0. So it initialized to 0. Now, one thing to be aware of is that you can't always be sure that's actually going to happen. And if we look at our variables, notice this one over here, this argv and argc has 1. Sometimes these can get garbage in them, and it's good to initialize them, which is what we did here. And we had set that to just regular 10, like that, so that we do have a value, and I need my equals. And it's not going to have, say, a garbage initialization value. We're quite sure what the value is. So something to be aware of. It's good to initialize variables as you're creating them. Okay, so this is a look at some of the basic variable types and assignments with them. What we're going to do next is start getting into some operations and also take a look at constants. Now we're going to see how to use constants in C++. And we're going to then progress into using operators. So to create a constant, what I am going to do is do const as constant and then followed by the type. So I may have something like my age equals 5. And I'm going to put a C out up here just so we can demarcate this. And I'll just call it defining constants, like that. And we can put 2 lines here, save, and terminate. All right, so there's my constant that I want to use, and we can go ahead and see out this constant. So value of const age int variable, and I'll just use my arrows, my age, and add a carriage return, save. Run this, and there we are. So that is just the output of the variable. So the thing with the constant is that you can't change it. So if I try my age equals 7 and save, and then I go ahead and build this, we get an error right off the bat. And so you can see this is underlined, indicating this is where the problem is. And then there's my hint, cannot assign to variable my age with const qualified type const int. So that will not work, and that's the benefit of a constant. And when you're creating constant, you may even want to just capitalize your variable, so all caps, something like maybe this, and you can even underscore things if it gets a little more complicated. So what we're going to do now is move into operators. And I'm just going to put another carriage return up here. All right, so operators are basically going to help us with mathematics, maybe string concatenation. So an example of this would be if I have this variable, an integer called 20, and I want to add 4 to 20, I can do something like this, plus x, and I can go ahead and put a breakpoint here. We don't need to see out that, and just let it run to that point. Let's see, go ahead and debug mode here, continue, and if we look at our variables and we have this x value is 24. And we're going to remove our breakpoint. Now another way to do this, I'm just going to comment this one out, is a shorthand notation which will do this. So this is also going to result in x equals 24. And I'm just doing 2 equals there for equality. And as well, we can do something like minus equals 5 to take 5 off of it. And so in that case, we would end up with a value of 19. So let's go ahead and just see out this. And what I'm going to do here is actually introduce input. So we've been doing output. Now we're going to capture some input from the user. So I'm just going to say, please input a value to compare with x equals 19. And I'll do semicolon there and just terminate this. But that's not all. So you can see here we're not actually doing anything with the input. So I'm going to declare an integer, initialize it at 0. So this is just going to be input, and I am going to now capture user input like this. So what that means is that we are going to have an integer called input, but we're also using it as the capture point. So when the user types something in, we will capture their value. And just to run this and see what it looks like. So down here in the console, you can see it's actually waiting for me. We didn't get a program finished or anything like that. So if I do a 20, hit enter, now you can see run finished and we're done. So that did capture the output. And in fact, if we want to, we can see out the user typed in, do something like that, and do input. And then we can just carriage return. All right, so let's try that. And I'm going to do 20. And you can see the user typed in 20. So now we can take that value and make use of it in different places. So what we're going to do is move into conditionals. And actually I want to see out this. So I'll just do something like this. We'll have a single line return, and then I'm just going to make 2 of them up here because we're kind of doing another demarcation. All right, so with conditionals, what we're going to do is check the value of input. And we're going to output it if it's greater than x. And what we're going to do is check if it's equal, relay that information. If it's greater than the input, so what we're typing in, we typed in a 20, that would be greater. So we'll output something saying that it is greater, and then otherwise we're just going to say it's less than. So that's the only scenarios we can have: an equal, a greater than, or a less than. So for that, we are going to create a comparison. So I'm going to say if x, I'm going to use 2 equal signs here for equality, and what we're checking is input. And then I'm going to add curly braces. Now these curly braces are going to be the body of my conditional. So if this is true, if x is equal to whatever the user typed in, then this in here is going to execute. So in here, what is going to execute will be this right here. And we're going to say x is greater than input value, like that. So that's all there is to this conditional. Let's go ahead and run this, in fact. So what we need for this to execute is for it to be the same. So if I type in 19, then you can see here we get our output. If I run it again and I type in 20, notice we don't get our output, we just see conditionals. So we are going to handle the additional conditional scenarios. So if x is greater than input, that's how I signify greater than. And then we're going to create another body with our braces, opening, closing, and do a C out. And in this one, we're going to say x is greater than input value. And actually what we want here, x is equal. Okay, we're going to do one more and just terminate this with a semicolon. So we've got 2 scenarios handled. Now, for the next one, do we need to say something like else if x less than input? So that would certainly handle the last scenario. That's the 3rd scenario, but we don't need to do that. We just are going to allow this to fall through. So if this is not hit, this is not hit, we're going to fall through to a final case, which we're just going to call else. So there's no comparison. It's just capturing that last one. And let's see, I don't think I got my closing brace on that one. All right, there it is. So what I'm going to do here is a C out, and what we're going to say in this case is that x is less than input value, and then we're going to do our terminator, and run. So let's see what we get now. All right, so we know our equal, but let's just see if it is going to output what we've updated. So that looks good. And run it again. If we're greater, and we are, so let's see here, x is less than. So this one fell through into the else when really we should be seeing this output here. So I'm going to run this again, and now we're going to do 18. See what our input is. So x is greater than the input. All right, so let's take a look at our x, and we actually output this x value here. So it's 19. The user typed in 18, and 19 is greater than 18. We should get x is greater, which is what we get here. We had that other issue. Let's see here if we go back, where we typed in 20, I think it was. I'm going to run that scenario once more. So x is 19 and input is 20. So we're just going to run that. X is less than input. So we get our fall through here. That looks good. And let's see, we had this one print out. We had our equal print out. So everything is looking like it is meeting all the criteria that we are expecting. Next, we're going to continue along the lines of logical operators, and then we're going to move into arrays. Now we're going to continue with logical operators, and what we're going to do is move into a bit of a different kind of operator. And now we're going to get into compound conditionals. So we've been doing just one comparison in these cases here. We're going to move forward and do it a little bit more complex. So I'm going to create a demarcation, so logical operators, and this is going to be things like R and so let's see here, I want to put my semicolon. What these are going to look like is, for example, we're going to do a comparison like this. So I'm going to have if input greater than 10, and we want to say also if it's less than 50, so we're going to have another here, so input less than 50. Now, this is not valid syntax because we need to signify that it is an and. So to do that, we use this. So I'm just going to put these like that. And then the R is going to be what's called pipes, like that. And that's usually around above the return key. And also it should have the backslash on that key, and the pipe would be above that backslash. So here we're saying if the input is greater than 10, not equal to it, just greater than, and it's also less than 50, so that should be 1 less than, then we can do something. So if the user types in 10, this is not going to work. So what we're doing here is signifying a range of values that the user's input can fall into, and something like 49 would work, 11 would work, 15 would work, 50 would not work because we're just saying less than 50. So let's go ahead and do a cout, and what we're going to do here is the value of the input is between 10 and 50, and we say in between, not equal to 10 and 50, but just in between. It doesn't include 10 or 50. So the value of the input is between 10 and 50. And then what we want to do is catch everything else. So we're going to create a default, which is our else. Else doesn't really care what's going on. As long as this is not met, it will run. So for this else, we're going to do a cout and say something like the value of, let's just do input, is not between 10 and 50. Just remove the on that one. All right, so we can go ahead and run this now. So we're making use of the captured value from further up inside of our file. So let's do 15, and let's see what we get here. we need a line break. So the value of the input is between 10 and 50. So that was good. This first conditional ran. And we're just going to add a line break there. Save. Okay, so that concludes conditionals. What we're going to do now is look at arrays. And just put another return there. Line return. All right, so for arrays, I'm going to create one. It's going to have space for 5 elements. And I'm going to initialize it as well. So I'll do an open and close curly brace. And then in here, I'll have my various elements separated by commas. And let's see, here's, all right, so that updated, that looks good. Now what I'm going to do is output some of these values. And we're going to have a little bit of instructions. So just kind of setting up what's going to go on here. So it is very easy to access any index in an array. Now an index is the number you'll supply to access an element inside of the array. This array has 5 elements. It's a 0-based index, so it's going to go from 0 to 4, not 1 to 5. And just don't get the indexes confused with the actual element values. So here's how it will work. We're going to capture some input from the user. We'll say, please input an index between 1 and 4. And we'll capture that. This again, input, which we've already defined. So we're going to use our conditional. We're going to say if input is greater than or equal to 1. And we do it like this. So start with whatever it is, the greater than, the less than first, then followed by the equality. We also want to say equal or less than 4, so it can be inclusive of 1 and 4. Now, because we have 2 comparisons, basically it's this compound, we're doing an AND on this. Input less than equal to 4. And create a body with our braces. So we're going to do a cout now. Say the value of the array element, or actually in this case, this is going to be the index, the value of the index. We're going to do that first. So we'll just have input is, so the value of the index we're going to do first, the value of the index is, and the array element value is, and here we're going to do data. We're going to drop in this index using our brackets again. And I think that is good. Now I could add a carriage return here. What I'm going to do though is actually create a whole new line and just do a carriage return right there. Now another thing we want to do is handle the default case. So if this right here does not pass, this conditional, then we want to do something. And that's where this default else will come in. All we're going to say on this is you are providing an invalid value, like that. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. Here we are. All right, so we need to do this first one, so we're going to do 20 on that one. Let's see, please provide an index. So it looks like we went flying right past our CN. What is the issue here? Warning, expression resulted unused. And you'll notice the mistake I made here. I've actually got our arrows pointing the wrong way. So we're using it like it's a cout. But because this was a CN, C++ knew something was up with that. And I'm just going to go ahead and let that run. We don't have to worry about a return value. So now we're going to run this again. We should see our input the second round. Here we go. So please provide an index between 1 and 4. Let's do a 3. And we should have put a semicolon there and a space. All right, so the value of the index is 3 and the array element is 4. Now because these are 0 index based, when I put in a 3, it's actually going to get the element at position 4. So add 1 to your index. That's the position, the actual position. Because if I drop in a 0, and I'm going to put a little bit of spacing on this one. So let's run this one more time. We have a 20. And if I do a 0, actually the 0 is not valid. We should get our else in this case. You're providing an invalid value. So let's run it one more time. And 20, do a 1. And let's see here, we get a value of 2. So that one right there. Let's go ahead and relax this a little bit so we can take our 0. And we're going to do something like 15, pass in a 0, and we get the value of 1. So if I march along here using the index values, we have index 0, that's position 1. Again, just add 1 to whatever the index is. Index 1, we get number 2. And so on up to this one, which is index 4, we'll get a value of 5. So let's go ahead and try our index 4. There's 4. And you can see here we get a value of 5. So that is a look at arrays, and we created here an array with 5 elements, so they're fixed. You need to specify what size that array is going to be. We left off with arrays, and one thing we can do with arrays that you'll often do with them is to loop through them and grab the elements out of the array. So now we're going to move into looping. So I'm just going to create an area here that demarcates the loop code from what we were doing with arrays. So I'll just do right here, loops. And first thing is going to be getting some user input. So we're going to use this while we're creating our loops. So I'm going to send the user some instructions, which are going to be, please enter a value between, let's do 1 and 7. Whoops, 1 and 7. And we're going to use that. So we need to get my semicolon. We're going to capture this and we're going to make some use of it. So I'm just going to put that into input. So we're going to go back with our conditional, which was from here, and I can just copy this code and we're going to put it right here. And what we're going to do is between 1 and 4. So let's see the issue with this. Unable to resolve input identifier. Okay, I'm going to wait until we actually do some compilation and we can see what's going on with that. So the next thing is we're going to initialize a counter, and this is going to work like an index for us. So we are going to see out, and in here we're going to have a while loop. So we've got a loop in a loop. And for the while loop, we can do while count does not equal input, and just create a body for this with our braces. And we're going to do cout is count, and cout we're just going to do a new line, and then we're going to increment our count. So this plus plus is just adding 1 to it. So as we go through this while loop, this body here, our count starts off with 0, and then we plus it by 1, which is going to give it the value of 1. We plus it again on the next iteration, that's going to be 2, and so on. So we just keep going through it. And as long as we're not equal to input, we're going to keep looping. So we're going to see what this looks like in a little bit. I want to go ahead and finish building out what we're doing inside of this conditional first. So we're going to have this loop here, which is going to be called a for loop. And inside the for loop, we are going to create this structure. So for, and we need to set its iterator, which is going to be starting off at 0 because we're 0 index based. And we're going to go to some point, which is going to be to input whatever that number is. So that's how far we're going to go. Now, unlike the while loop where we're doing this count plus plus, so we had to create this variable right here, initialize it, then we have to manually do the increment. That is actually built into the for loop structure. So I'm using this I variable. You can see we initialize it, we have the plus plus, so everything's very concise with the for loop. And then what we're going to do is cout I and cout a new line like this. Okay, so we are still inside of our for loop. What I'm going to do now is create an else. Here, create a body for the else. So this is our default case, and I'm going to just say you are providing an invalid index and save. So let's go ahead and run this now and see what kind of input we get. So this is going to be for the first part of what we have for our input, and this is not where we're at with our loops yet. We have that 1 through 7, so I'm just going to do a 3, and here we are with our 1 through 7, and probably just want to make a semi or a colon there. So the value I'm going to do is 3. Enter, and you can see our loops. So here's our while loop, and notice the values that they're printing out are the same because they're both starting at an index of 0, and they're basically just iterating these I values. So for the for loop, if we go back and look at our array, we have this data array. And then down here, we are, let's see, the for loop, we're going from 0 to this input. And what we can actually do is, on a new line, see out, we have, let's say, data I, and we're going to just do some comment here, array item, like this. And we're also going to put a new line on it, save, and let's go ahead, as long as we don't go out of our bounds. So if I comment this out, and we can do, let's say, something like this, and we have our data I, and we're going to do a new line here, and just close this off and realign our code, save, and run. So let's go and look, and let's see here. Actually, we are going to comment out some of this other code that every time we have to run it, we've got to stop. So let's see here. We want this part, and we can just comment out this down to here. So this comment is actually just doing this block of code, which is we're using a /* instead of a //, and that gets us down to here. So I open it, and then I do */ to close it. And then we have some other input that we're getting up here. So let's see, we have this one here. And what we can do is start with operators, comment it out all the way down to arrays, because we want that array to be valid. So let's save, and I'm going to build, make sure I haven't messed anything up. Looks like there's a place we'll need to uncomment. So let's see here. So input is probably being missed. And if I go and look, so right here, so the input is defined right there. And then down here, we're using it again. So let's see here. I think it is defined a little further up right there. So we're going to want this one. And what I can do is take it and put it outside of the comment block like that. And if I build, now everything is okay because input is in scope. Scope just means that we have defined that variable above somewhere that we can see it. So before, when we tried to use input, we got that build failure because input didn't exist, but we're still trying to make use of it right here. So now it's defined further up in our file, and we can make use of it. So let's run this and see now if we get fewer areas that we actually have to do any kind of input. And let's see. And if I scroll down, I think everything is okay. So I'm going to let this continue on, and we're basically right here. So I'm going to input a value of 3, and there's our for loop. And you can see here our output that we're getting. So let's scroll down and look at that right here. No, right here actually. So our data I is, we're displaying the counter, and then we're displaying the data I. So that's why we're kind of getting 2. But notice we get a 0, and then we start getting in sync with whatever count is. Basically, it's because of the values coming out of the array. Now, if I go and change the array values so they're not so close. So I can do something like this and save. Let's run that and just let that continue out. So let's go back with our 3. And there we go. Now you can clearly see the values coming out of the array. Let's go back down to where we were putting this together, and we broke everything out into its own lines right here. So let's go ahead and use our concatenation of strings now, and I'm just going to remove this comment, and I need to add my arrows here. So we should be able to see this a little bit clearer now. I'm going to go ahead and run and let that continue on. Do 3 again, and so there we are. So that looks better than what we had before, but just another way to do it if you want to have everything broken out on its own line like that. So that is a look at looping inside of C++. So what we're going to do next is look at structs. Last time we looked at looping in C++. What we're going to do now is work with structs. And structs are like a light version of a class, which we haven't got into, but we will. Basically, they allow you to define this more complex data structure that you can have different properties on. So say, for example, we're going to do a student. We can have a name and age and height all inside of this structure so that we don't have these disparate pieces running around trying to describe a student. So where name is a variable, age is a variable, height is a variable, and they're not linked to anything. In this case, they are going to be linked to something just called a student. So I'm going to create a new section here, and we're going to call this structs. And we'll create our first struct. So that's going to be preceded with the keyword struct, and we're going to call it student. And we'll create a body as usual using our braces. And notice the trailing semicolon right here on line 118. That's necessary to close the struct. So we're going to do char name is going to be 15. So we're basically defining 15 characters allowed for that character variable. And we're going to have a float is age and a float, which is height. And then down here, we're going to do a cout and say, please input your name. And we'll grab this into a variable called name. So we'll create an instance for our struct. So our struct is student, so we're going to create a variable called S1, and that is going to be basically an instance of our variable. And I need to define my name here, so I'm going to create char name 15, and notice this is going to be different from the name in here. All right, so for this, we are going to do a string copy, and we're going to do s1 dot name comma name. The reason we're doing this is because char arrays are not signable in C++. All right, and then we have our s1 dot, and you can see here we're getting output of the different properties on this, or fields that are on it. So we're going to do an age of 26, s1 dot, we'll do a height equals 6. All right, so our struct is set now, and we're going to do a few couts on this. So we're going to say something like showing data from, and then we're going to do another cout. We're going to have each of our values. So we're going to have a name here. We'll do it like that. This is going to be an s1 dot name, and we'll do a new line. And we're going to do all of them. So we can just copy these and paste twice. So we'll have age dot, and we can see we have age. We're going to have height, and when we do our dot, we can see height. Save, and I'm going to go ahead and do a, let's see, a breakpoint right after we create the last part of this, which is height. So I'll go ahead and let this run and continue to our breakpoint. Let's see, did we get down there? Okay, so we have an input here. I'm going to go ahead and let that run out. So please input your name, and I'm just going to do Brett. And so here we are. And if we go and look at our variables, we should see the assignment for everything inside of this struct. So if we scroll down to S1, that's where it's at. So you'll notice that our variables, we can't see them until we open the struct, which I do now. And here's name. And then we have the other variables for age and height. So I need to open up name, and you can see here the array is created for name. So I will go ahead and let this continue on out. And let's see our output right here. So that's all there really is to it with the struct. And just one of the things here, because we have this char array, we are needing to go ahead and create a copy, a string copy, to put it into this other array. So we grab the input and then we put it into our variable inside of the struct. And then these right here were just hard coded. You could have done a CN on those as well and captured that from the user. Now what if we want to do something like a department name where we have string and we just do department name like that, and down here we can do S1 dot department name equals, let's say, accounting, save, and print it out. So down here we're going to do department name dot department name, save, run. So we'll have an input we need to get across, and then our name, and there we go. So you don't have to use, basically what I'm getting across, you don't have to use a character array. You can just use a string to capture if it is a string. So it just depends on your scenario of what you may want to do. All right, so that is a look at structs and concludes the fundamentals for this module. So we're going to have a challenge coming up, and we can go ahead and get into that one. I'm going to go through our challenge for this module, and we're basically going to create a calendar. And what you're going to do is ask the user to enter a year, and then you're going to print out the formatted calendar. So for example, if I want to do a year of 2016 and I print it out, so there's my year of everything for this calendar. Now it doesn't need to be perfect, of course. You really want to just kind of hit the number of days in each month. So January has 31, February 28 sometimes, and then you have March with 31, April has 30. So all of those are correct. And then you can do different things to get some of the years, the first day correct, and start with those. And that's basically what you want to do. And then of course you want to print out this format, and that's all it is printing out every month, and then you have your calendars in this format. The main point is to really get your days in every month correct. And then if you can get something going with getting the first day of a year correct, then that's just kind of icing on the cake for this challenge. So what I'm going to do next is go ahead and start the walkthrough for the challenge. So go ahead and pause this video, go give it a try, and then come back and I will do the walkthrough. Okay, I've got a new project open here, and this is going to be for our challenge, and I'm going to go ahead and start doing the walkthrough. So there's a few things we're going to want, and I'm going to do some includes for. And we already have our standard library. So I'm going to include as well, of course, the very often used IO stream, so we can do our COUTs and CNs. And then I'm also going to include IO manip, and we'll see use of this. All right, so starting down here inside of our main, I'm going to create a few variables. So I'm going to have year, first day in, current month. And I can declare both of these variables on the same line like that without any issue. And then I'm going to do current month equals 1, int num days, so number of days, and that is just going to be a declaration. All right, so I want to get some instructions out to the user. What year do you want a calendar for? And we're going to capture their input in the year variable. And then I'm just going to see out an end of line like that. And then what I'm going to do here is just a comment. So this will calculate the first day of a year. And for that, I'm going to create a few variables, x1, x2, x3, and then we're going to do something like this. And then next I'm going to go ahead and initialize these this way. So I'll have year minus 1 divided by 4, and x2 equals year minus 1 divided by 100, x3 equals year minus 1 divided by 400. And then we're going to start day of year, which is going to be first day, and we want this variable here, and that is going to equal year plus x1 minus x2 plus x3, and we're going to do a modulo operation, which is going to be 7. And that's basically going to give us back how many times something can go into that calculation without the remainder. Let's see here, I've got an issue with my spelling. All right. And let's see, maybe I still have an issue with my spelling. Unresolved identifier. Okay, because this is misspelled. Now if I just copy this, I think we should have the correct variable. So the modulo is going to basically take just the remainder. So whatever this is divided by 7, you get a remainder. It's going to use that number, and that's going to be the first day in current month. All right, and so now we're going to do a C out just to let the user know what we're coming up with, and end of line. So we'll give them the year that they typed in, and now we're going to loop over all months in a year. And to do that, we'll do while current month less than or equal to 12. So a condition inside of our while loop. And we'll create a body for this. Let's see, we're going to want our ending brace. There it is. So we're going to get the total number of days in the current month. And then we will also use some conditionals to help us with the headers. So current month, if it is equal to 1, we're in January, obviously. And let's go ahead and do num days equals 31. And C out January, end of line. And then we're just going to follow a similar pattern with this. And what I can do in this case, or what we can do, is copy the if part here and paste. Then we'll close out, else, paste. Close out, else, paste. Close it out, and just keep kind of going down the line. Now that we have this else if pattern established, we can actually go ahead and copy the else if and then just paste. So here we have February, March, April, and then we're going to do May, June, July, August, September, October, November. And then we'll go back and just put in the right values for all of these. So this is going to be February, which will have 28 days in this case, and we're going to do 2. And we're just going to keep going through these, and it's going to be 1 through 12 in that conditional. All right, so we have March, which is good to go for 31. And then we're going to have our 4th month here, which is April, has 30 days. And then we're going to keep going with 5, and that's going to be 31 for May. And we go with June, and we'll have 30 days in June. Now we have July, 31 days, and this is month 7. And then we have August is month 8, and we know August has 31 days as well. And we get into month 9, which is September, has 30 days. And this is going to be September. We get into month 10, and we have October. And then month 11, so it looks like I missed a month here. This is November with 30. We'll do another copy. Paste that for 12. 31 days and December. Save. So we should be able to actually run this and get our headers output. That way we can kind of check our cells to see where we are, and as we move along through building this out, we'll be able to catch a few bugs along the way. So let's just do 2016. Looks like we are in a loop here, so we'll definitely need to correct that. So I'm just going to terminate it, clicking the button over here, the red one. And let's see here, so while our month is equal to or less than 12, our current month that is. So there's a little bit more build out. This is going to be a fairly big conditional or loop. And so what we're going to do to break out of this is increment our current month. And we will, it's just going to take a little bit more time to get to that point. So this if, all these ifs are going to roll up, and let's see here. You can click on the minuses over here out in the margin. That way you don't have to scroll through all of this. And if I just keep clicking, they just keep rolling up. And eventually I'm at the end of this conditional, and I've got a nice area to work with without having to do all the different kinds of scrolling. So one last thing on this part, and we're going to continue in another video as we move on. I'm going to go ahead and do these headers, which are separated by just a space. So these are the day headers. And we'll do end of line. I'm going to do one more C out. So we'll have here underscores, just spanning the distance of these, or maybe a little bit more. And then we'll do end of line as well and save. Okay, so that is the first part of this walkthrough. So next we're going to pick up and continue building out our solution. We left off with our while loop here and just going through every one of our months and getting our days correct. Then we have our headers, and now we're going to continue inside of this loop. So I'm going to create a new variable here called day and initialize it to 1. So if our day does not start from Sunday, then we're going to leave some space for the structuring of our calendar. All right, so now we're going to do int I is going to be first day in current month. And we're going to start another loop with that, which is going to be I is greater than 0, and create a body for this loop. Let's see, we want our closing brace. There we go. And in this loop, what we're going to do is see out a space. And then we're just going to increment, or actually going to decrement this I. So this is just leaving a little bit of spacing format, and we'll see how this plays out once we actually start building through it. Now what we want is to get into creating our calendar. So again, we're still inside this loop. So now we're going to begin with the calendar part of this. So start creating calendar. And for this, we're going to do while day is less than or equal to num days. We want to create a body, and I have my closing brace there, so that's good. And what we're going to do is create 2 spaces, and then we're going to write the day of the month, and again follow it by a space, which will look like this. So we're going to have C out set W2 and day, and then followed by a space, save. So basically set width on this. And so now if there's more than 5 weeks, we're going to initialize first day to 0. So if more than 5 weeks in month, initialize first day to 0. All right, so that will look like this. So first day in current month. And we're going to do, it's equal to 6, so we're over on that one. C out inline. And what I mean is we're actually at the end of the week. So we're going to do first day in month. I'm just going to grab this. And we're going to say it equals 0. So initialize it back. Then we're going to have an else. So we will say in our else, and we want our closing brace. All right. Let's remove this extra line. And in here, we're going to just increment the date of the current month. So let's see if I can paste. Yep. So first day in the month, and we're going to do +1. All right. And then outside of that, we have our day, and that is going to equal day +1. And then we can also do some C outs here, end of line, and end of line. Now I have my colon. Then the current month, we are going to say equals, we're just incrementing current month. Now that's where we got stuck in our while loop earlier. So now you can see it's incrementing. Eventually it's going to be greater than 12. We will then get out of our loop. When down here, we're just going to do a C out in line. I think this might be a little bit of formatting issue. Let's see here. This while aligns with that. We have our closing brace. Okay, so this may be okay. I'm going to build it and see if we run into any problems. Let's raise this and see where is it complaining. Let's see, maybe scroll way up here. Right there looks to be the one. So just kind of scroll up the top of all this and get what we're looking for. This is line 85. Okay, so here it is. It's not liking that. It's end L. All right, build. And so again, I'm just going to scroll further up. All right, we're at line 107. So let's go down there. Here we are. NL, NL, NL. We need another arrow. Save that one and build. Okay, so at least it builds. Now we're going to see if it will run. So let's go ahead, do 2016. All right, what do these look like? And let's see, November, October, September. So this is looking pretty good. And looks like we have an issue there. Yeah, so the first week actually has a problem that we're going to need to look into. Yeah, so we're getting some stuff up here. It's not exactly what we want. But our days are there. So 28, March is 31, April is 30. Let's just scroll on down. So 31, November's 30, October's 31. So that part right there at least is looking good. And now it's just a matter to figure out where's the problem, where's it breaking down that it's not getting this kind of formatting here correct. So I just scroll to the top of this. There's probably 3 areas that this is going to be happening in, and one of them would be here where we have our spacing. Another could be this line here. It's just a matter of getting this to push over, getting these days to push over as well. So I'm going to do a little bit with that. I think our days needs at least a space there in the beginning, and I'm going to add a couple more spaces on this, and let's just go ahead and run it. Go back with 2016. So our days are actually looking pretty good. We just probably need to do a little bit more getting our day headers to look at, but the actual dates seem to be lining up how we would want them to line up. So for this right here, I think we're going to need a little bit more spacing or a few more underscores in here. So let's see, I'm going to add, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. If I add 4, 1, 2, let's see what that will look like. 1, 2, 3, 4. Go ahead, build and run. And so that looks pretty good right there. And let's see here, I'm going to add, I wonder if I add a space between each day, if that is too much, but we will see. Run this. All right, and that is what it needs, because that's how our days are actually getting spaced. We have, looks like 2 characters, maybe it's 2 of them, 2 spaces in between right there, our dates, which is the same as what we have here. So that's going to play out quite well, and that those 2 between the dates are coming from right there. So that's going to make everything line up, and that is our completed project now for this module. And you can see here we're looking pretty good with all of our formatting, so nothing odd is going on there. So that completes this challenge. I'd like to summarize what we've covered in this language fundamentals module. So we started looking at variables and constants and saw how to create them, some of the fundamental building blocks of any programming language. We've gone over conditionals, and we saw the syntax needed to create various types of conditionals, which can have ands or ors inside of the comparison. and also basic if and else conditionals. Next was arrays and how to initialize arrays, access elements in arrays. And then we had various kinds of looping structures, and we saw the syntax needed to make those work. We also had structures, so structs in other words, and these are very lightweight. We saw how to create them, add properties inside of them. And we ended with the good challenge that also provided us with a solution walkthrough and let us get some hands-on experience of what we've learned in this module.